When looking at any text as a tragedy, it's important to identify who the main character or tragic hero is. In La Belle Dame Sans Merci, this is clearly the knight-at-arms, who faces a downfall by the end of the poem. He finds himself in a state of limbo, unable to determine whether he is alive or dead, recounting his story to anyone who passes by. Although we learn little about his life before meeting the lady, his position as a knight suggests he had a noble status that he has lost. In Lamia and Isabella, however, it is less clear who the tragic heroes and victims are. Both poems focus on female characters who suffer tragic ends. Lamia, initially appearing magical, loses her power and faces mortality, while Isabella, who loves Lorenzo deeply, ultimately suffers immense loss. The deaths of characters like Lucius in Lamia and Lorenzo in Isabella draw attention, but it could also be argued that women like Lamia and Isabella play central roles in leading their lovers to tragic fates. In The Eve of St. Agnes, the roles of the characters blur more. Porphyro can be seen as a heroic figure saving Madeline from danger, risking much for love, or as a predatory villain for intruding on her vulnerability. His involvement creates elements of tragedy that spark various interpretations. A key theme in tragedy is the loss of identity. Characters often struggle with knowing who they are, much like Lear in Othello. In Lamia, when Lucius leads Lamia through the streets, he hides from his philosophical teacher Apollonius, indicating a rejection of rationality. Isabella's fixation on Lorenzo's corpse and Madeline's fantasy world cause them to lose connection with their identities and safety. The knight-at-arms also shows a transformation from an active chivalric figure to a tragic one, symbolizing a loss of societal identity. Typically, tragic resolutions involve the deaths of key characters. In many stories, this leads to a sense of order being restored, as seen with Lodovico's reassuring speech in Othello. Keats manages to suggest some restoration in Lamia and Isabella, but La Belle Dame Sans Merci ends in despair with no hope. The closing imagery in The Eve of St. Agnes also reflects bleakness and a return to death. Jean Anouilh describes tragedy as clean and restful, aptly capturing Keats's narratives where tragic endings are undeniable. Readers see characters heading toward their fates, such as Porphyro hastening Madeline into danger. Lamia's desires lead to her doom, mirroring the lovers in The Eve of St. Agnes, whose outcomes remain uncertain, diverging from typical happy endings in tragedy. Each of Keats's 4 poems contrasts a joyful, sublime world with a death-marked reality. The magical realms of nymphs and dreams are outmatched by the harshness of cold and death. While a biographical perspective on Keats's personal experiences with death may seem appealing, what's vital is the representation of death's dominance in the real world compared to the vibrancy of the sublime one in his works.